conversation. So please stay tuned and listen to this interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson. We get to the God question at the end, but he has lots of interesting things to say about his new book, Accessory to War, The Unspoken Alliance Between Astrophysics and the Military. The book is out now. He is, of course, an astrophysicist, an author, podcast, TV host, and director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City, one of my favorite venues in New York City. His podcast, Star Talk, is Emmy nominated, and his show, Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, which debuted back in 2014, won 4 Emmy Awards, a Peabody Award, 2 Critics' Choice Awards, and more. The right loves to attack him, but I think you'll find this interview really interesting. Neil deGrasse Tyson, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for your interest.
Well, the book is called Accessory to War. Really interesting. I'm reading it, written with your research associate, Avis Lang. You're talking essentially about a marriage between the defense industry and astrophysics. Is that a fair way to put it?
That's precisely what the entire book is about. And the fact that it's 600 pages long is a small indication of how rich and nuanced and extensive and timeless that relationship has been. And the subtitle of the book is Accessory to War, The Unspoken Alliance Between Astrophysics and the Military. None of this is secret. It just no one ever has the occasion to reflect on it. Whereas the physics community, we know they made the bomb, the H bomb and the A bomb. You needed a physicist for that. They tapped the energy of the atom. And chemists, they make napalm and, chemical weapons. The traditional sciences have obvious applications to conflict when you think about it. But my field, not so much. You say, well, I wonder what it is. And so this book is an exploration of the history of that relationship.
So let's start with now and then go back into time. Right now, what is the relationship? What is the defense industry looking to astrophysics for?
Well, so that's a great question, and in a very recent example. And oh, by the way, just to be clear, since we don't make the bombs or the weapons, but what we care about is strongly overlaps with what the military cares about. Mm. So we care about detecting really dim things in multispectral wavelengths. That's exactly what the military cares about. And our intellectual advances in those and innovative advances in those categories have direct application to things that the military cares about, including stealth. And in 2 recent examples, we once mapped the entire sky using infrared. Again, this is part of the multispectral imaging. When we think of a spectrum, we think of, naively, you just think of like a rainbow, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. But the entire electromagnetic spectrum is not only visible light, but it's infrared and ultraviolet and X-rays and gamma rays and radio waves. We've heard of these bands before, but maybe didn't put them all together as one construct. All of that is light. And through our own innovations, primarily through that of engineers and scientists, we found ways to exploit each of those bands of light for our own needs in civilization. We take microwaves and we use it for communication and to heat our food. We have infrared. Again, it's invisible light, but we use it, the infrared part of bulbs, to keep like the French fries warm at McDonald's for hours before you buy it. But also, missiles moving through the atmosphere leave infrared signatures. And we have maps of the sky charting every single infrared emitting object in the universe, detectable from Earth. Well, if you want to detect a missile, you want to know what's not a missile first. Okay, so you need to know the background infrared signatures that are out there so that if something is then moving across it, you can then identify it, target it, and take it out. So this is an example where we create an infrared map, the military just takes it. Another example of recent years, there's the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which is a huge collaboration of many universities. Sloan is the major funding organization, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. They fund not only sort of educational programming on PBS, they also fund science, actual science experiments and projects. This is the largest survey of objects in the night sky that has ever been conducted. Every star, every galaxy, every quasar, everything that goes bump in the night is now in this catalog. Mm. This project was conceived knowing that the bandwidth of data that it's producing nightly would be so huge that you want to create algorithms to process that information effectively and efficiently. Otherwise, you're awash in it and you can't do anything with it. So we had whole teams of computer scientists guided by the needs of the astronomical questions we're asking, and they developed very innovative pipelines, data pipelines to obtain, process, and interpret the information. This thing gets published in computer journals because it was all innovative, without precedent. National security interests took notice. And our people then briefed the national security agencies of the United States on what these algorithms are, because they want to do the same thing. They want to take scads of information, process it, and come out with interpreted information that means something. It's not just noise in the din of signals. So, and that's just two examples just in recent years, but this goes all the way back to navigation in the times of Columbus, Magellan, Galileo, basically selling his telescope to the military to get money. And then he looks at the sun, moon, and stars. And the military, oh my gosh, I have a telescope. I can see the enemy when they can't see me. And I can know how big their troop movement is. And they don't know that I know this. What an advantage I have. So this is the kind of relationship that's explored.
And there's also, it seems to me, things that come out in ancillary ways, that when the military and astrophysics works together, we actually learn things that we might not have learned without that marriage. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair, but I wouldn't so much call it a marriage as, because marriage implies you're always talking to one another. Okay. That's not actually the case. Well, or not in some cases. Think of it as like a two-way street, or we're neighbors and there's a picket fence. And every now and then I come and say, oh, what's cooking over there? Oh, we just developed this. And oh, I could use one of those. And then they come out and look over the picket fence and see what we've developed. And then they reach over and take it. We can't prevent them from taking it because we just published the data, and it's at that point it's in public domain.
Right.
But that's what the relationship is. And the biggest contribution, I would say, historically, has been towards navigation. If you have, whatever your motives are, is it defense? Is it empire building? You want to know where your enemies are and where they're not. And if you navigate around the globe, how do you know where you are? There are no longitude and latitude lines imprinted in the ocean surface or on land masses. We learn this because astronomers of the day mapped the sun, moon, and stars, and that became a coordinate system for the sky projected down onto Earth's surface. And once you do that and you know how to read this, then you can then navigate. And in one example of this, a stunning example, Captain Cook, we've all heard of the guy, he was sent to the South Pacific to actually do a science experiment to observe what's called a transit of Venus. Only happens every 200 years, a couple hundred years. Venus moves between Earth and the sun. You can see a black disk move across the sun as Venus orbits. Okay, it's a slow thing, but it's important. You make that measurement precisely. You can use geometry to figure out the distances in and among the planets in the solar system. An interesting astronomical challenge. He gets sent with telescopes and tools to make these measurements. Oh, wait, this is Great Britain that sent him. What was their motto for centuries? The sun never sets on the British Empire. Well, why do they get to say that? They got to say that because, or among other reasons, Captain Cook had a second set of instructions. On the flip side of, first, observe the Venus. Oh, here's new navigation tools our astronomers just perfected. Use it to map coastlines of every landmass that is unfamiliar to you and bring that information back. He brings it back within 18 years. Great Britain took control of Northern Australia, of Tasmania, of New Zealand, of the Cook Islands, of Pitcairn Islands, of Fiji, of Tuvalu, all of these island states in Oceania. Britain took control over. And they started shipping convicts to Australia. And so this was empire building, exploiting the knowledge of astronomers to accomplish it.
But there is also, I mean, we do want to defend the country. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, what do you think of Trump's idea for a space force?
Yeah, so the Trump naysayers they made fun of it. But the fact is, the concept of Space Force is not new. In fact, in the early 2000s, I'm sure wasn't the first one, suggested this in a commission that I was appointed to by then George W. Bush. There were 12 of us to study the future of the aerospace industry. It was on hard times back then. It had lost 500,000 jobs. There was consolidation. There was worry that if we lose our aerospace industry, that would affect our commerce. Because you order something today, it's on your doorstep tomorrow from Amazon. An airplane brought it there, right? Our commerce, our transportation, and our security, because they make the jets for the Air Force, the Air Force jets and Navy jets. So I'm on a commission to study this, and in so doing, that's when I saw sort of how some of that sausage is made and what the values. And I said, well, should we separate out space from air here? These are two different areas of command and control. The dynamics are different. The expertise you need to operate in those regimes are different. And the Air Force guy says, we don't think that's necessary. They're in control then and now of U.S. Space Command. We already have space under military control. It's done by the Air Force. So if we made a Space Force, it's mostly an accounting shift. You take all these things that were under the Air Force and you shift them over. Now it's just a Space Force. The Air Force launched the GPS satellites under the U.S. Space Command branch of the Air Force. So it would not be a weird thing. And we've done this before with the Air Force.
Right.
In World War II, it was the Army Air Force.
So
they were not their own branch. And then we said, look, guys, if you're training them, you got to train pilots and not infantry. That's a different thing. The engineers have to fix aerodynamic surfaces and not tanks. So the Air Force became its own branch of the military, and no one today would question the value of that.
Right.
So I imagine the future where no one questions the value of a Space Force.
That makes sense. We're talking about the book Accessory to War, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Avis Lang. I want to ask you about something else. I don't mean this as in a debating way, but it's something I've always wanted to talk to a real science writer about. I read a lot of science books, a lot of popular science books, and I love it. And I'm also a devout Christian. And I have noticed almost every book I read now has chapter after chapter explaining to me why God doesn't exist. And one of the things that always bothers me about this is that the arguments, the people who are writing are fantastically intelligent and informed, but their arguments are not really theologically informed. I wonder if it is a problem to have scientists talk about this in the same way it's a problem to have actors talk about politics. Do you ever feel that you're being taken away from your expertise on this question?
So a couple of reactions to that. First, let's look at some numbers. And these numbers are accurate. The last I knew of them, if there's an updated survey, I'd have to check on that. If you look at the percentage of Americans who are religious, and there's an interesting way to answer that question unambiguously. Rather than ask, do you go to church every weekend? There are people who go to church who just go for the cupcakes, or to meet people. And you don't want to count them among those who are religious just because they say they go to church. So you want to ask a deeper question. So you can ask, do you pray to God with the expectation that God's divinity will touch you in some way and come and influence events or phenomenon in your life? If you answer yes to that, you're religious. We're good with that, okay? That's a really clean, sharp divider, okay? And this also weeds out people, I'm spiritual, but what do you have any plan? So, all right. If you ask that question, something like 85% of Americans are religious. Now you go to academia. So people who are highly sort of educated folks in any field, that number drops to about 65%. You go to science-trained people. So there'll be engineers, mathematicians, and the physical sciences, biological science. It drops further, you get to about 40%. Then you want to divide it up, you get to sort of the biologists, they're actually down around 15%. My field is a little more than that, maybe 18%. My point is, whatever books you're reading, if they're trying to argue that God doesn't exist, and they're written by science-trained people, it's not written by the 40% who pray to God. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's fact number one. Fact number two, I don't know what books you're reading, but most science books I read don't mention God at all.
Uh-huh.
So, are you attracted to the ones that try to put the fight? I mean, I don't know which ones you're reading.
Well, I'm attracted. I'm attracted to books that have a big outlook, and I'm reading books like *Sapiens* and *Enlightenment* now. I just finished one, *Just Babies*
okay.
and things like that.
Philosophical sweeps.
Uh-huh.
Okay, yes. So now I get where you're coming from. If you're just reading a book on black holes, they're not talking about God.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, if you read the larger philosophically driven books, there will likely be, if not a part of a chapter, a whole chapter addressing this. And so I can't speak for them, but I can speak for myself. And I will here and now. And what I'll say is my only issue with let's take Christianity specifically, because that's most familiar to us in the United States and presumably to both of us. My only issue is if you are using your Christianity to interpret the Bible in such a literal way that it directly conflicts with objectively established scientific evidence.
Uh-huh.
And by the way, I don't even have a problem with that. I only have a problem with that if you now want to take that into the science classroom and present it as science. It's not science, it's theology, it's religion. If it's anywhere, put it in the religion classroom, put it in comparative religion, put it in Sunday school. You don't have, here's something I think is interesting. You don't have scientists, much less atheists, picketing outside of churches saying that might not necessarily be true. That doesn't happen. In America, there's like generally respect for what you do on a Sunday, or if you're Jewish, on a Saturday, okay? And unless you're in a really rabid racist neighborhood, you're not going to harm the Muslim who's praying the 5 times a day. In this country, the free expression of religion is one of its most beautiful, strongest points. That's what attracted so many immigrants, because they couldn't practice the freedom of religion where they came from, okay? So, all right, so meanwhile, while you don't have atheists picketing churches, you have fundamentalist Christians trying to influence school boards to change the science curriculum. Now, what I will say there is a simple response. It's because education is not mentioned in the Constitution, by default, it means it's now the purview of the states. Anything not explicitly forbidden in the Constitution is allowed and controlled by the states. Okay. Which means states control education. School boards control education. If you are on a school board and you're deeply devout to the point of being fundamentalist, that is, every word in the Bible is literally true,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to put that in your science classroom, no one can stop you. No, you can outvote anybody who wanted to keep science as it is traditionally taught. No one will stop you, but I can tell you what will happen. Those students will not know what science is or how and why it works. And science, that knowledge, is fundamental to the future of the economic growth of the nation, our health, and our security.
So your objection is not to God per se, no matter what your personal beliefs are. Which are
personal. I speak for myself.
Yeah.
No, and I don't. You don't see me debating anybody on this. You don't see.
That's true.
Look, comb the internet, okay? And some of my more viewed videos, I do mention God, but I mention God like in 0.1% of anything I say publicly. But everybody focuses on that, and it sort of grows out of proportion with my actual material. But if I'm ever there, I'm simply commenting on however religious you are, we need you to know the difference between theology and science, and that science is a fundamental driver of everything we care about in modern civilization. And when you start interfering with that, you're interfering with the future of what the country can be relative to any other country that is heavily investing in science.
A fair response. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the book is Accessory to War. Thanks so much for coming on. I hope you come back and talk again.
By the way, thanks for asking me. I mean, you know, if all the books you read on science, they're all saying God doesn't exist, and you bring a scientist on your show.
No, I love science. And it was an absolutely fair response. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Talking to you. Thanks.
Really interesting.